On the 24th of October 2021, Miya Marcano finished a shift at Arden Villas with plans to fly back home to her family later that evening. That wouldn't happen, and instead, she disappeared. Although investigators would eventually solve her case, her story leaves us with many unanswered questions, and a great deal of frustration wondering how this man was able to take Miya from a place where she should have felt safe. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and today we're talking about the relatively recent case of Miya Marcano. Miya was an attentive, loving, and deeply family-focused young woman, so when she suddenly vanished one evening, family and friends knew something terrible had happened. By the way, I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases here on a weekly basis, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. So pull up a seat, grab a coffee, and sit back. This is the case of Miya Marcano. Today, we return to America, and flying over South Florida, we begin our case in Pembroke Pines. Pembroke Pines is a relatively large city found 20 miles north of Miami. And like all things Florida, there's a lot of sun, a lot of sand, and if you ask the locals, a lot of great food too. With excellent weather and a strong commitment to the arts and culture scene, there is a lot to feast your eyes upon in Pembroke Pines. And it's here that we find Miya Marcano and the Marcano family. Miya was born on April 26, 2002. Her father, Marlon Marcano, is a famous DJ, also known as DJ Eternal Vibes. And her mother, Emis Gabriel, now resides on the Virgin Islands. Miya was confident and full of life as a child. And although her mother and father were no longer together, she had strong support from both parents. And with her older brother, Marlon Jr., and stepmother Giselle Blanche in the picture, Miya was shrouded in love and encouragement as a child. These conditions reflected onto her personality. Although Miya was petite, standing at just under 5 feet tall, she was full of strength and confidence. Growing up in the Sunshine State, she attended Charles Flanagan High School, and in her own spare time, Miya would often participate in carnivals, including the Miami Broward Carnival. Graduating in May of 2020, just a few months after COVID had become a thing, it was a very disappointing end to high school for Miya and her friends, with things like prom, final classes, and graduation parties all flying out the window. But unlike many students who decided to hold off from uni in 2020, Miya was built differently. She was ambitious, and she wanted to progress in her adult life. And with Florida already holding some of the best weather that America has to offer, she decided not to venture too far either. So she chose to begin her studies late that year at the University of Central Florida, only 200 miles north from her hometown. As her first year in Orlando ticked by, Miya transferred from UCF to Valencia College. And after initially pursuing an arts degree, she was also considering a move into sports medical or physiotherapy. Learning to become an adult as an honest worker, Miya also had a part-time job to make financial ends meet. She worked in the leasing office of Arden Villas, student accommodation that hails itself as luxury off-campus apartments which are located near UCF. And to make things easier for Miya, this was also her place of residence. Reviews of the place even before 2021 were a mixed bag. Some of the pros included a pool, a gym, pets were allowed, and the staff were cordial. But Arden Villas had several issues too. The maintenance sucked, parking was difficult, and the rent was generally too expensive for what it was. Either way, Miya made it work. She found time to study, work part-time at Arden Villas, and even live like a student too. From what I could find out, the working conditions weren't too bad either, though she would have to work inconvenient hours, such as Friday evenings and weekends. Miya would also have several awkward encounters with the maintenance guy, who was quite persistent in flirting with her. But Miya always rejected his advances. She actually found him to be somewhat of a pushy creep. Eventually, he left her alone. As September 2021 rolled around, summer was still in full swing in Florida, if not a little long in the tooth. Muggy and with frequent thunderstorms, people were looking forward to the autumn months. Miya was still balancing her time between work and college, but she also had plans to visit family back home in Pembroke Pines. So, come Friday the 24th, Miya was due to hop on a 1-hour flight from Orlando back to Lauderdale, but only once she had finished her shift at Arden Villas. Signing out at 5 PM, Miya had just enough time to head back home, grab her bags and head out to the airport. The timing was tough, but but Miya was excited to see her family again. However, after finishing her shift, Miya failed to respond to any text messages or phone calls, which of course in this day and age is strange. Perhaps she was busy trying to catch a flight, or maybe she had issues with her phone. At this stage, nobody knew. But as the evening progressed and her parents waited on the other side, their concerns heightened when her flight arrived with no Miya on board. Panicked and fearful, they called Miya on her cell phone to figure out where she was, or at the very least to make sure she was okay. But Miya's silence persisted throughout the evening, and figuratively speaking, she had vanished. Miya's disappearance was excruciatingly unusual, as, with most incidents like this, her silence was outstanding to her usual behaviour. By 9:30 p.m, calls were made to the Orange County Sheriff's Office to check in on Miya and her apartment, and by 9:42 p.m, a deputy had been dispatched to Arden Villas. Arriving just after 10 p.m, the officer knocked on the apartment's door 3 times, but no one answered the door. One of Miya's roommates eventually showed up, and after checking inside, she noticed that the door to Miya's bedroom was locked. In an official incident report, Officer Paulino Samir noted that after peering through the bedroom window, it was unlocked. He pushed the window open to see a little better. Furniture was propped up against the bedroom doorknob, which appeared to be placed there to prevent anyone from entering. Several other details were unusual too. Jewellery was scattered on the floor, her luggage bag was still in the room, and her pillow also appeared to have blood on it. When asked if there was anyone in Miya's life who she was seeing or had recently become friends with, her roommates brought up the maintenance guy, who was named Armando Caballero. She stated that Armando had been trying to go on a date with Miya for quite some time, but she had always refused his advances. She described their relationship as only friends and nothing more. Miya's family were not the kind to just sit back and wait. Instead, they prepared themselves, hopped in their car, and drove 200 miles north to Orlando, arriving just before 3 a.m. Officer Paulino was still on the case when they arrived at Arden Villas, and in the early hours of the morning, he was met with several members of her family. They were quick to highlight several oddities that the deputy had missed. For one, a yellow box cutter was found underneath her rug, which was both unusual and unrecognisable. And the other thing was slightly more confrontational, as soon after arriving at Arden Villas, the maintenance guy Armando also showed up. His presence was enough to stir emotions within the family. They actually knew who he was, and they'd heard plenty about him through Miya in the previous months. Armando began talking to police about a mutual colleague named Tati, but straight away, Miya's family expressed their doubts. And then this happened.
It's Tati. You keep mentioning Tati and no one knows Tati.
You get a call,
the
all of a
roommates
sudden,
don't even know Tati.
You've been sleeping since
You
10
keep
o'clock,
saying
and all of a
Tati is
sudden
a
you're showing
friend.
up here at 4 o'clock in the morning looking for me.
Tati were conversating about it till I finally, it came
Okay,
up.
but
Should
Tati
I go and
is
see
someone...
if I see anything?
No one knows Tati. That's my whole thing. Not
Tati
even the
is
roommate
an
knows
employee
Tati.
here.
She's an employee, but you keep saying Tati is a friend and that you've all hung out together. As of right now, you have sent obsessive texts to Miya. We have all seen the texts. You talked about giving her your life savings. You cash out her money, and you claim that you weren't in touch.
Who told her
It's
gave her
on
life
text.
savings? I never
As
said
a matter
that.
of fact, we're going to get a police report to pull your phone records if that's the case.
What you trying to do?
Family argued with Armando, highlighting that they knew that he'd been sending obsessive text messages to Miya, sending her money through Cash App, and at one point had even offered his life savings to her. Rejecting these claims, Armando left shortly after. Police arguably should have done more, considering the family's claims, Armando's strange behaviour, and just the fact that he was there at 4 a.m. were all suspicious factors. Alas, he was allowed to go with no further questions asked. At first, police didn't suspect Armando had any involvement. He told officers he had last seen Miya while also at work at 3 p.m, around 2 hours before she suddenly disappeared. By noon, Miya's details were uploaded to the FCIC, and shortly after that, a missing persons bulletin was posted. Although officers were slow to begin their investigations, Miya's family were not. In fact, that very same morning, they discreetly observed Armando from their own car. And what they witnessed was an extremely worrying red flag. As Armando climbed out of his silver Ford Fusion, he was spotted taking a blanket, a glove, and a bag out of his car, before walking into his own apartment located in Seminole County. Without a shadow of a doubt, they were certain that the blanket belonged to Miya. and knowing this, they called 911. Castleberry officers responded to their call, and after arriving, yet another awkward confrontation between Armando, Miya's family, and officers ensued. But with no active search warrant, officers were legally unable to walk into his apartment. But to their surprise, Armando allowed Miya's family to look through instead. Nevertheless, nothing significant was found. With no active search warrant and no significant evidence found by officers, he was free to carry on with his day. And the Marcanos were beyond frustrated. They just knew that Armando had something to do with Miya's disappearance, which made Armando's next move all the heavier on their hearts. As at 3 PM later that day, Armando jumped into his car, drove away, and disappeared. Sheriffs were already aware that Armando had demonstrated an intimate interest in Miya, but as the hours ticked by, those reports had finally become more concerning to them. And by 4:30 PM, just 24 hours shy of Miya's disappearance, a warrant was issued for his arrest. Within the next hour, detectives raided and secured Armando's apartment. But too little, too late, Armando had vanished. Walking away from his house as a free man, not even 2 hours earlier. Investigators soon determined that on the Friday Miya disappeared, someone had accessed her apartment with a master key at around 4:30 PM. And as a maintenance worker, Armando was known to have one. After linking the key's ID to Armando Caballero, this new information would officially make Armando a wanted man, as, at the very least, he had entered her residence without her consent. County sheriffs started to dig into his profile, as tracking Armando down was now absolutely crucial to Miya's disappearance. But now, they would have to look both ways. The question wasn't only where Armando had been, but also, where is he now? In an effort to try and find out, detectives pulled his cell phone records. But this investigation was going to take some time. Emotions heightened over the weekend, as both Miya's and Armando's silence persisted. It seemed as if the longer this case dragged out, more and more questions rolled in. For example, where is Miya? Will she ever return home? And where is Armando? Is he even with her? Both Miya's family and investigators remained deeply determined and hopeful to find Miya and Armando. But on the afternoon of Monday the 27th of September, some unexpected news came in.
911, you need police, fire, medical?
We found a on property. Someone hung themselves from a garage. Is a male?
Okay.
Yes, male.
All right. He's he's deceased. Beyond any help?
I believe so.
Okay.
He's
all right.
dead, right?
A cleaner who was on her shift working at Sabal Club had walked into one of the site's garages, and after turning the lights on, she had unexpectedly found the body of Armando Caballero. After leaving his apartment at 3 PM on Saturday, he made his way to Sabal Lake in Longwood. It is unclear when exactly he took his life, but by 9:35 that night, he had sent his final text message. So, in the middle of a terrifying story, with the main suspect now dead, and being able to walk free from investigating officers, this wasn't looking good. Armando taking his own life was unexpected, but even more so, it hinted toward a very concerning conclusion to Miya's fate. An innocent man wouldn't do this in an open investigation. Nevertheless, and despite the alarming change in circumstances, Miya's family remained strong and resilient. I mean, maybe Armando's death was irrelevant. At this stage, nobody knew. But the journey forward would be long and full of suspense, as without a suspect, they had no one who could answer their questions. Instead, they would have to rely on digital forensics teams to track Armando's movements through surveillance footage and cell phone records. Over the following days, dozens of Miya's family flew in from as far as Canada and the Caribbean to support in search efforts to find her. And as those days passed, Miya's story reached the hearts of many more people. The number of volunteers searching for Miya climbed. Efforts were focused on a 30-mile radius around the Arden Villas complex, with an emphasis on lakes, rivers, bushy areas and swamps. And by the time September the 30th had rolled around, the emergency response team had conducted over 30 searches, spanning Orange County, Seminole County and Volusia County. Orange County deputies started to ramp up their search efforts at Arden Villas, and this is when FBI got involved, supporting the Orange County Sheriff's Office to better increase their odds in finding Miya. Mia's loved ones held vigils to pray and hope for a safe return, with some of those vigils attracting hundreds of people at a time. Investigators were also hard at work. They identified through Armando's cell phone data that in the days around Mia's disappearance, he had been to several areas, including downtown Orlando, the Paramore area, Orange County, Seminole County, and Volusia County. While officers retraced Armando's footsteps, they noticed that he'd recently visited the area of Tymber Skan. Tymber Skan is definitely not a safe place to be. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Almost every modernized city has its fair share of rough areas, and let me tell you, you do not want to be here at night. Situated just southwest of downtown Orlando, Tymber Skan is an old estate of condominiums next to Lake Catherine. And built in 1972, it went from bad to worse. The foreclosure crisis back in 2010 saw a drastic spike in property vacancies in the area. And over time, Tymber Skan's vacancy rate grew. Struggling to keep up with payments, the estate eventually lost its garbage services, and eventually its water services too. And this further spurred more residents to abandon their homes. In short, it's a dire place to be. And despite being very close to downtown, not even Google Maps wants to visit the area. Reports of drugs, violence and death often plague its name. And what's worse, is between 8 and 9 PM on the night of Mia's disappearance, Armando's phone pinged here. Investigators learned that at one stage in his past, Armando had lived in Tymber Skan, therefore knowing the area very well. Following this new information, Orange County Police decided to investigate the immediate area surrounding Tymber Skan. So on the morning of October the 2nd, 2021, search teams began to comb the area, walking through its abandoned buildings and discarded woodlands. And at 10:45 that morning, it comes with a heavy heart to share those officers had discovered the body of Miya Marcano. Her purse containing her ID card was found nearby, and it was evident that Miya had been there for quite some time. She had been bound with black duct tape, and was found partially undressed with a pair of jeans, a bra and a robe. This wasn't the news that Mia's family or thousands of others had hoped for, and of course, thus began a long and painful journey of sorrow. Finding Miya in the same location that Armando was known to have been in just hours after she disappeared was enough for police officers to believe that he was to blame. And if taking his own life wasn't suspicious enough, this really added to his doubts. Another vigil was held for Miya later that night, but this time all hope had turned into despair. This one was to mourn the loss of Miya Marcano. As news of Mia's death started to sink in, questions over who was responsible for her death began to emerge. Obviously, Armando was, but with him well and truly escaping any accountability, who was responsible for enabling his actions? It is very clear that negligence was involved in this case. Mia's family attorney, Darrell Washington, highlighted that the apartment complex where Miya had lived and worked should have done more to keep residents safe. And as it turns out, this wasn't Armando's first offence either, as in March that very same year, while working in a different apartment complex, he had issues with another young woman. Sending her a note to ask her out on a date, the 24-year-old hesitantly accepted his offer, agreeing to meet him a few days later. But when he asked her to change the date to the very same night, she changed her mind and turned him down. And just hours later, while this woman was in her room, a dumbbell weight was launched through the window. An officer was called out to investigate, with this body cam footage recording the damage. Although not confirmed, it is very likely that Armando is the idiot behind this incident. And if he is, it paints a very clear pattern of his aggression when being rejected by women. Case details, which are found on Polk County's online records, show that Armando had previously run into the law in 2013, when he detonated a small homemade explosive in a secondary school as a prank. Fortunately, no one was harmed, but it did lead to Armando's prosecution. One of the many frustrating things about this case is Arden Villa's reaction to Mia's disappearance, as it took them 3 days just to acknowledge that she was missing. And the very next day, they would even reject being negligent in their background checks when hiring Armando, even claiming that these previous offences were of another man with the same name. But Armando's name and date of birth are on these court documents. So, are they claiming this man had the same first, middle and last name, and the same date of birth? Either way, whether they were aware of Armando's background and decided to ignore it, or they simply didn't know, not enough attention or care was given when Arden Villas decided to employ him. And the result was a dangerous man being given the key to every student's apartment in a complex without adequate surveillance or lighting. In the days after Mia's death, residents of Arden Villas and the surrounding neighbourhood held a protest, demanding that the company strengthens its security measures. Arden Villas' total lack of compassion didn't help them either, as not only did they never take partial accountability in allowing these circumstances to occur in the first place, but they never actually reached out to Mia's family with an apology or even a letter of condolences. She wasn't just a resident of Arden Villas, she was also an employee and a friend. Like I said, even before Mia's death, Arden Villas weren't doing too well on Google's reviews, but since then, it's gone from bad to worse. And I couldn't help but notice that a lot of those early reviews were centred around Arden's lack of maintenance too. Which has me wondering, maybe Armando was just as bad at his job as he was at being a decent man. The family's attorney also criticised authorities for not acting sooner, because if they did, Armando would still be alive and would have to face the consequences of his actions. And maybe just then, if he was willing to talk, he would be able to reveal the fate of Mia's final hours. Towards the end of December 2021, Mia's autopsy was finally released. And in the report it said, in the manner in which she was found, with multiple restraints, and in an abandoned area of an apartment complex, indicates that some type of assault had occurred. But unfortunately, due to advanced decomposition, the cause of death remains as homicide by undetermined means. This means that we don't really know how Miya died, or any form of physical circumstances that happened prior or after her death, which must be devastating for Mia's family. Miya Marcano's wake and service was held at the Cooper City Church of God on October the 14th, 2021, before she was laid to rest in Bailey Memorial Gardens in North Lauderdale. Miya is remembered as a shining light in her family. They remember her as goofy, funny, family-oriented, and full of love. And once again, this was a young woman at the beginning of her adult life. She deserved to feel safe and be safe, not only in her place of residence, but her place of work too. And tragically, a heartless man with not even half a mind was allowed the opportunity to surprise her in her own home, take her life, and then cowardly take his own. Since her death, Mia's family have started the Miya Marcano Foundation, which was founded to support, educate and provide resources to families of missing persons while advocating for the protection of students and our most vulnerable population. And Mia's Law, which is aimed to elevate security and personal safety on residential properties in Florida, is already making its way through state legislation. Mia's family and loved ones continue to fight for a safer world for students and vulnerable people. I'll leave a link to the Miya Foundation below. I think I've just about covered most of the details around this case. Unfortunately, many questions still remain, most of which Armando has taken to his grave. Maybe one day we will learn more details on Mia's story, but sadly, for now, this is where we are. I wish all the best for Mia's family and friends, and I hope Mia's Law will make a considerable change to many people in the future. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this video interesting, or you learned something new today, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. As always, please share your thoughts on this case in the comments section down below, and I'll see you again real soon for another video. But until that moment arrives, look after each other. Goodbye.